Hi everyone, I'm Theo.
And I'm Marshall, and this is
Twin Cinema.
And welcome once again to Marshall Monday, where we'll be reviewing the film that I picked out for this cycle, The Shining.
Alright, if you're not familiar with how we do things here at Twin Cinema, we review 2 movies every 2 weeks based on one theme. On Monday, we review the movie that Marshall picked out, and on Thursday, we review the movie that I picked out.
Now the theme for this cycle is horror films that feature protagonists who are trapped due to a blizzard or some sort of snowstorm. Now, if you want to know more about this theme, you can click on the link here. However, you don't have to watch that video to enjoy this one.
Alright, and before we start our review, Marshall, why don't you tell us why you picked The Shining?
Yes, well, it's been almost a decade since I last watched The Shining, and I really wanted an excuse to rewatch it. And I had forgotten how great this film is. It is, to me, encapsulates how good the horror genre can be. It's accessible, but it doesn't bow down to the lowest common denominator. And it's really horrifying, and yet it doesn't lose its artistry. To me, it proves that a film can be both mainstream and an art house film.
Alright, well before we start our actual review, we're going to do a quick synopsis of the film. Please be warned, there are spoilers ahead.
Jack Torrance is a struggling writer and recovering alcoholic who has taken a job as the winter caretaker for the Overlook Hotel in the hopes that the solitude will help him concentrate on a new writing project. Though he was warned that a previous caretaker had gone crazy and committed a murder-suicide with his wife and 2 girls, Jack has no qualms with bringing his wife Wendy and his psychic son Danny along with him to the hotel. Jack and Wendy are initially happy with the situation, but Danny is haunted by the many ghosts that stalk the halls of the Overlook. As the winter continues, Jack becomes increasingly frustrated with his writer's block and begins to take his frustrations out on Wendy. Sensing his weakening mental state, the ghosts who had been haunting Danny begin to haunt Jack, telling him that he needs to kill his family. As a catastrophic blizzard rages outside, Jack finally succumbs to their influence, and the film climaxes with him attacking his family in a psychotic rage.
Alright, well since we've talked about what the movie is about, why don't we go ahead and get into our review.
Yep. So, first we're going to be talking about our 2 main ideas for this theme, which would be isolation and paranoia. For isolation, from the very first shot of this film, there's a sense of isolation. You have these gorgeous vistas of the Colorado wildlife, or not wildlife, but the scenery. We've got these mountains, these lakes, and they're huge, impressive, almost overpowering. And then you have Jack Torrance's car, and he's just by himself. And that starts out a sense of isolation from the very first shot. Then you also have the isolation of the characters. Even before they move into the hotel, Danny says he doesn't have any friends in Boulder. Wendy's a housewife. It's kind of implied that she just stays at home. And then, of course, you get into the hotel. The rooms are these grand, large rooms where these characters are by themselves. You almost never see them interact with each other until the end of the film. And then, of course, once it starts snowing, the roads are shut off. It's like 20 feet average snowfall in Colorado in that time. So you can definitely tell that these characters are completely shut off, not only from people physically, but from each other emotionally and mentally as well.
Exactly. And then we move into paranoia that sets in. You know, definitely the most paranoid character in the movie is Jack. And I think it's really interesting when you look at Jack's paranoia, because it definitely is that Jack's paranoia stems from his insecurities about himself that he then transfers into other people. Mm-hmm. He, throughout the film, seems very insecure about his abilities as a writer.
Well, I suppose I ought to try to do some writing first.
Any ideas yet?
Lots of ideas. No good ones.
Mm-hmm. He's plagued with writer's block. He seems insecure about his abilities as a father. Mm-hmm. And he seems insecure as his abilities to provide, like be the provider of his family in general. He talks about all these different things multiple times. And then as he descends into madness, that's when he starts to take these insecurities about his ability to succeed in those areas and then places them externally onto his family members.
Ever thought about my responsibilities?
Oh, Dick, what are you talking about?
Have you ever had a single moment's thought about my responsibilities? Have you ever thought for a single solitary moment about my responsibilities to my employers?
Instead of it being his inability to be a provider, his inability to do a job, it becomes Wendy is trying to stop me from completing my responsibilities.
Yep. And speaking of Wendy, while Jack's paranoia seems to stem from his inability to reach the masculine ideal, I feel that Wendy's paranoia in many ways is related to her ability to reach the idea of femininity and motherhood. It's implied in the film that Jack is an abuser to Wendy and Danny. It's definitely shown that Jack hurt Danny by dislocating his shoulder. It's always presented as a mistake, but I never really feel that Wendy trusts Jack with Danny. At the very beginning, where she's describing the incident, she's like, oh, it's a mistake, it's an accident, it could have happened to anybody.
Just one of those things, purely an accident. My husband had been drinking, and he came home about 3 hours late. So he wasn't exactly in the greatest mood that night. And, well, Danny had scattered some of his school papers all over the room, and my husband grabbed his arm, to pull him away from him. It's just the sort of thing you do 100 times with a child, in the park or in the streets. But on this particular occasion, my husband just used too much strength, and he injured Danny's arm.
But there's a lot of scenes where you kind of see that that's not true. Like on their first day at the hotel, Danny's sort of going towards Jack, and Jack's sort of reaching out towards him, but then she pulls Danny, towards her and away from Jack. In another scene, Danny has gone to room 237. He has been choked by a ghost in the room. He emerges from the room with a bruise on his neck. Obviously, she's going to blame Jack, even without the history, just because he's the only one there. But once she realizes it wasn't Jack who did it, she doesn't ever say she's sorry. I don't think she ever believed that he couldn't hurt her son. And it's shown in other scenes too, like when she's afraid that she's going to wake Jack up and he's going to hurt Danny. So I think that her paranoia is in some ways founded, but it has more to do with wanting to protect Danny than it is with not trusting Jack.
Of course, what I think is really interesting about Wendy's character, especially compared to Jack's character, is Wendy's character, in the end, triumphs. Mm-hmm. She's the one who escapes madness, and she lives. Mm-hmm. Whereas Jack descends into madness and dies. Yeah. And I feel like that's because whereas Jack continuously pursues this hyper-masculine ideal and never gives that up, Wendy realizes the limitations of being this very negatively idealized idea of femininity, that a woman is supposed to be subservient to a man, is supposed to do what her husband says, because she puts up with Jack's crap for a long time. He's very verbally abusive. You don't see him really until he goes totally crazy. You don't see him hit her, but he tells her to get the fuck out of here. He's very rude to her in general when she's being a very supportive wife.
I'm in here, that means that I am working. That means don't come in. How do you think you can handle that?
And at the end, she learns to stand up for herself. There's a lot of reviews about the movie that criticized it for portraying her as basically an Olive Oyl character, which is funny because later on she would play Olive Oyl.
Yeah, I think she was born to play Olive Oyl.
Yeah. As someone who is helpless, but she's not helpless in the end of the movie. Yeah, she is very helpless throughout the movie. She allows herself to be the victim. But at the end, she refuses to be a victim. She fights back. She attacks Jack physically. She gets Danny out of the way. She's resourceful. She leads him away, And so at the end, I really feel like she's a very triumphant hero.
I agree. And even Danny, who through most of the film either doesn't seem to be really proactive about anything, either he's just kind of walking around or, triking around really, or he's possessed by Tony. Even at the end where he's trying to escape Jack, he ends up digging himself into the snow and escaping Jack through the maze. So he definitely shows resource as well. I think both Danny and Wendy are very resourceful characters, which is also a confirmation of our second criteria, which was resourcefulness of the protagonists.
Completely. So let's talk a little bit about this as an adaptation. Mm-hmm. Obviously, this is based on the book by Stephen King, But it's also fairly well known that Stephen King doesn't like this adaptation, which is really weird for us to think about because it's such a great movie.
It's really good.
But then if you look at it as an adaptation, it's not particularly faithful to the source material, and especially relating to the characters of Jack and Danny.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Stephen King has said many times that Jack Torrance in the novel is very autobiographical of his own struggles as a writer and struggling with alcoholism. And in the book, Jack is he's a very sympathetic character. When he descends and hurts his family, it feels, there's a tragedy to it because he's a nice guy. Yes, he has issues with his past with alcoholism and, hurting his son when he was drunk, but he's really has made a very hard effort to, reach out and make up to his family. Mm-hmm. And so that's the character in the book, but in the movie, Jack is always a dick.
He's
another
Jack. He's a jackass that we reviewed.
Here's to 5 miserable months on the wagon and all the irreparable harm that it's caused me.
Yes. So that also brings us to the other part of the adaptation is how much of Jack's Descent into Madness is supernatural and how much of it is himself. Now, I honestly am one of those people who think that in the film, this is a supernatural film. There's some people who may think it's all in the character's head. I don't think that.
I don't feel like you can say it's all in the character's head.
No. Especially with, Danny who's able to tell the future, and then he's talking to Halloran. He's they're doing the mental telepathy thing. There's no way there's not some sort of supernatural going on. But in the book, it is 100% the evil of the hotel that's causing Jack to do this. Yes, he's a weak character. He's human. He has his flaws. But he's possessed by the hotel. And in fact, in the book, he overcomes that possession to get Danny out of the way. And he's almost the hero of the film, basically, because he's...
Hero of the book.
In the book, sorry. He helps save Danny and Wendy. In the movie, yes, he's influenced by the ghosts. But I think the ghosts are really just telling him what he wants to hear.
Yeah, in the book, the spirits literally possess him and force him to do these things. In the movie, it's really more that the evil spirits of the place just bring out the worst in Jack. It was there all along. But, whenever, for example, when he's talking to the old caretaker who's now plays the servant character, it's not that he's really telling Jack to do these things. He's telling Jack what he wants to hear.
Perhaps they need a good talking to. If you don't mind my saying so. Perhaps a bit more.
Jack has already put that paranoid fear that he is going to fail because of his family onto his family. So he's just getting encouragement from the ghost rather than the ghost forcing his hand to do these things.
Yes, and I think the line...
You are the caretaker. You've always been the caretaker.
Is to me a reference in saying that the hotel itself is a manifestation of Jack's violent side. So, to me, I think this is a film about spousal abuse, while that's always been there, while the book is more about the disintegration of the family, it's a metaphor for disintegration of the family as a whole. So,
and a loving family as a whole,
yeah.
Whereas it's not a particularly loving family anytime.
No, even beforehand.
And I feel like that's really powerful as a horror movie because what's more scary, something that is not real or something that could be real?
It is real.
Is real for some people. It could be real for you.
Yeah. So, I think it's kind of obvious, but Theo, what did you think about this film?
I love this movie. It's one of the classics. It's one of the best films ever made, I feel. Everything from the actors are great, the camera work. Kubrick did a lot of innovative things with Steadicam, which is a new technology at the time. Mm-hmm. And the sound design really, as someone, I'd watched this when I was younger and now coming back to it as someone who's gotten more into film as I've gotten older, it's just amazing how much sound really plays into the eeriness and creepiness of this movie.
Yes. For sure. To me, like I said in the opening, this is what a horror film should be. It's the perfect mix of art house and mainstream. It's scary, but it's also beautiful. And to me, what's horrifying, it's not the ghosts, even though some of the time that is scary. What's really horrifying is the demons that haunt Jack.
Completely agree. All right, well, that's it for our review of The Shining. If you liked us, please follow, subscribe, share on social media, and we'll see you guys on Thursday when we do Theo Thursday, our review of John Carpenter's The Thing. Have a great week, everybody.
Bye.
Great party, isn't it?